Arkansas, September 1879. The reading of Elijah Thornton's will took place in the parlor of the family home, with all 5 of his sons gathered around the lawyer's desk like vultures waiting for a carcass to stop twitching. Owen Thornton sat in the back corner, knowing already that whatever scraps fell his way would be exactly that. Scraps. He was the youngest son, the quiet one, the one who had spent more time reading books than working the fields, the one his father had never quite known what to do with. The lawyer, a thin man named Pritchard, adjusted his spectacles and began to read. To the eldest son, William, went the farmhouse and the 200 acres of prime bottomland that had been the foundation of the Thornton fortune. William nodded, as if this was only his due, which in his mind it certainly was. To the second son, George, went the general store in town and the warehouse behind it. George smiled with satisfaction. The store was profitable and required less physical labor than farming. To the third son, Robert, went the timber rights to the North Hills and the sawmill that processed their lumber. Robert had always been the strongest of the brothers, and the sawmill suited him. To the fourth son, Samuel, went the cattle herd and the grazing lease on 3,000 acres of hill country. Samuel was already calculating how quickly he could expand the operation. To the youngest son, Owen, went. The lawyer paused, squinting at the document, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was reading. To my youngest son, Owen, I leave the cave property on the eastern ridge, comprising approximately 12 acres of rocky, non-arable land, including all mineral rights thereto. Silence filled the parlor. Then William began to laugh. "A cave?" William said, his voice thick with amusement. "Father left Owen a hole in the ground?" The other brothers joined in, their laughter filling the room with a sound that Owen would remember for the rest of his life. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable, shuffling his papers as if hoping to find some additional bequest that would soften the obvious insult. "The property does include mineral rights," Pritchard offered weakly. "That could potentially—" "Mineral rights to what?" George interrupted. "Bat droppings? That cave's been there since grandfather's time. If there was anything valuable in it, someone would have found it by now." Owen sat in silence, letting the mockery wash over him like water over stone. He had expected nothing, and nothing was essentially what he had received. A cave on 12 acres of land so rocky that even goats couldn't graze it. A hole in the ground that his father had probably included in the will, only to say that he had left something to all 5 sons. "Well, Owen," Samuel said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes, "at least you'll have somewhere to live. The cave stays pretty cool in summer, I hear." More laughter. Owen stood, nodded to the lawyer, and walked out of the house without a word. Behind him, his brothers were already discussing how to divide the valuable properties more efficiently among themselves, Owen's existence already forgotten. The cave was exactly as unpromising as his brothers had suggested. Owen made the 2-mile walk from the family home to the eastern ridge the following morning, carrying a lantern and a determination to at least see what his father had left him. The path wound through scrubby forest and across rocky outcrops that explained why no one had ever tried to farm this land. The cave entrance was a dark mouth in the limestone cliff, perhaps 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall, partially obscured by wild persimmon trees that had grown up around it. A small stream trickled from somewhere inside, running down the slope to join a larger creek in the valley below. Owen lit his lantern and stepped inside. The main chamber was larger than he had expected, perhaps 60 feet deep and 40 feet wide, with a ceiling that arched overhead like a cathedral. The floor was relatively flat, covered with sand and small stones deposited by centuries of water flow. The air was cool and fresh, carrying none of the musty smell he had anticipated. He explored deeper, finding passages that branched off from the main chamber, some too narrow to enter, others opening into smaller rooms that might have housed bears or mountain lions in decades past. The cave was extensive, far more extensive than the simple hole in the ground his brothers had mocked. But George's question remained valid. If there was anything valuable here, why hadn't someone found it already? Owen spent 3 hours exploring, finding nothing but rock and darkness, and the occasional cluster of stalactites that dripped water with patient persistence. When he finally emerged into the afternoon sunlight, he was tired, dirty, and no richer than when he had entered. But he was also thinking. He had nowhere else to go. William had made clear that Owen was not welcome to stay in the family home now that it was his property. The other brothers had offered no alternative. Owen had a few dollars saved, enough for perhaps a month of boarding house rent. But after that, nothing. The cave was shelter. Rough shelter, certainly, but shelter nonetheless. "All right," Owen said to no one, looking at the dark entrance that was now his only home. "Let's see what we can make of you." The first month was about survival, making the cave habitable enough to live in through the approaching winter. Owen used his meager savings to purchase basic supplies: lumber for a sleeping platform, canvas for a makeshift roof over his living area, a small stove that could burn wood without filling the cave with smoke. He worked from dawn to dusk, driven by necessity and by a stubborn refusal to prove his brothers right about his uselessness. The cave, he discovered, had advantages that offset its obvious drawbacks. The temperature inside remained constant at approximately 55 degrees, regardless of the weather outside. This meant it was cool in summer and warm in winter, or at least warmer than a poorly built cabin would have been. The stream provided fresh water. The surrounding forest, though sparse, offered firewood and game. By November, he had constructed a decent living space in the main chamber. A wooden platform raised off the stone floor, walls of canvas and salvaged lumber, a cooking area near the cave entrance where smoke could escape. It wasn't comfortable by any standard, but it was his. The townspeople who learned of his situation reacted with a mixture of pity and contempt. The Thornton brothers had spread the story of Owen's inheritance widely, and it had become something of a local joke. "There goes Caveman Thornton," someone would say when Owen came to town for supplies. "Hey, Owen, found any gold in that hole yet? Maybe he'll strike oil or dig up some dinosaur bones." Owen endured the mockery with the same silence he had shown at the will reading. Words were just sounds. They couldn't hurt him unless he let them. And he had more important things to worry about than the opinions of people who had never had to build a life from nothing. The winter was hard but survivable, but Owen hunted when weather permitted, preserved meat when it didn't, rationed his supplies with the care of a man who knew that waste could mean starvation. He read by candlelight in the long evenings, books borrowed from the town library by the only librarian who didn't treat him like a curiosity. Her name was Margaret Chen, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had come to Arkansas during the railroad boom and stayed when most others moved on. She was educated, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by the Thornton family's wealth or status. "Your brothers are fools," she told Owen during one of his visits to the library. "Anyone can inherit money. Building something from nothing takes actual ability." "I haven't built anything yet," Owen replied. "I'm just surviving." Surviving is building. Every day you don't give up is a brick in the foundation. He thought about that conversation often during the dark winter nights, adding bricks to a foundation he couldn't yet see. The discovery happened in March, during the first warm week of spring. Owen had decided to expand his living space by clearing rubble from one of the side passages. The work was tedious but satisfying. Each wheelbarrow of rock removed meant more room, more comfort, more proof that he was improving his situation rather than merely enduring it. He was 3 days into the project when his pickaxe struck something that didn't feel like ordinary limestone. The sound was different, higher pitched, almost musical. Owen held up his lantern and examined the spot where his tool had landed. The rock there was darker than the surrounding stone, with a strange, crystalline structure that caught the light and threw it back in fragments of color. He chipped away more carefully, revealing a cluster of crystals unlike anything he had ever seen. They were deep purple, almost black in the shadows, but glowing with inner fire when the lantern light hit them directly. Each crystal was perfectly formed, 6-sided columns that terminated in sharp points, ranging in size from his fingertip to his entire hand. Owen sat back on his heels, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. He had read about such formations, had seen illustrations in the geological texts he borrowed from Margaret's library, but seeing them in person, touching them with his own hands, watching the light dance through their translucent depths, that was something else entirely. He worked through the rest of the day and into the evening, carefully extracting crystals from the vein with tools that suddenly seemed inadequate for such delicate work. His pickaxe was too crude, his hammer too heavy. He needed precision instruments, the kind that geologists used, but he had none of those. So he improvised. A kitchen knife served as a prying tool for smaller specimens. A wooden wedge, tapped gently with a rock, helped separate larger clusters from the host stone. He learned quickly that patience mattered more than force. A rushed extraction could shatter crystals that careful work would preserve intact. By the time darkness drove him to stop, his hands were raw and his back ached from crouching in the cramped passage. But the wooden crate beside him held perhaps 50 pounds of purple crystal, each piece more beautiful than anything he had imagined finding in his worthless inheritance. Owen had seen pictures of amethyst in his books. He had read about the crystal formations found in Brazil and Uruguay, valued by collectors and jewelers for their beauty and rarity. But he had never heard of amethyst being found in Arkansas. He spent the rest of the day carefully extracting crystals from the vein he had uncovered, filling a wooden crate with specimens that ranged from thumbnail-sized fragments to a cluster the size of his 2 fists together. When darkness finally drove him to stop, he had perhaps 50 pounds of purple crystal sitting in his cave, glittering in the lantern light like frozen violet flames. The question was, were they worth anything? Owen brought his best specimen to town the following week, wrapped in cloth and hidden in his pack like contraband. He didn't go to any of the local merchants. They would have laughed at him, spread the story of Caveman Thornton's latest delusion. Instead, he went to the train station and asked about shipping rates to St. Louis, where he knew there were dealers in minerals and gemstones. The station master, a practical man named Henderson, noticed the careful way Owen handled his package. Something fragile? Something I need appraised, Owen admitted. Know anyone in St. Louis who deals in geological specimens? Henderson considered. My brother-in-law knows a fellow, runs a shop on Market Street, buys and sells crystals, fossils, that sort of thing. Want me to write you an introduction? 2 weeks later, Owen received a letter that changed his life. Dear Mr. Thornton, the letter read, I have examined the specimen you sent and must confess considerable surprise. The crystal you provided is high-quality amethyst of a type I have rarely seen outside of South American sources. If your cave contains more material of this quality, you may be sitting on a significant discovery. I would be very interested in purchasing additional specimens and would offer $50 for a crate similar to the sample you sent. Please advise on availability. $50 for one crate of crystals. Owen read the letter 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. $50 was more than most men earned in a month. He had dozens of crates worth of material already extracted, and the vein he had found showed no signs of running out. He wrote back immediately, offering to send 5 crates at the quoted price. The response came within a week. The dealer would take as many crates as Owen could provide and would pay $75 per crate for specimens of the highest quality. Owen hired a wagon and spent 2 weeks hauling crystals to the train station, shipping them to St. Louis in a steady stream that had Henderson shaking his head with amazement. "You found all this in that old cave?" the station master asked. "In a side passage I was clearing for more living space. There's more where this came from." How much more? Owen thought about the vein he had uncovered, about the passages he hadn't yet explored, about the 12 acres of rocky land that his brothers had considered worthless. "I honestly don't know," he said, "but I intend to find out." The summer of 1879 was the summer Owen Thornton became wealthy. The initial vein of amethyst proved to be just the beginning. As he explored the cave more systematically, he discovered additional crystal formations, not just amethyst, but clear quartz, smoky quartz, and clusters of crystals that combined multiple colors in single spectacular specimens. The St. Louis dealer, whose name was Hartman, became a regular correspondent and eventually a business partner. He traveled to Arkansas in July to see the source of the specimens that had been astonishing his customers, and what he found left him nearly speechless. "This is remarkable," Hartman said, standing in a chamber that Owen had recently opened, its walls studded with crystal formations that sparkled in the lantern light like stars in an underground sky. "I've dealt in minerals for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. The quality, the variety, the sheer quantity." "Is it valuable?" Owen asked, though he already knew the answer. "Valuable?" Hartman laughed. "Mr. Thornton, if you manage this properly, you could be supplying collectors and jewelers for decades. The market for high-quality specimens is limited only by your ability to extract them carefully and get them to buyers." They formed a partnership that month. Hartman would handle sales, marketing, and distribution. Owen would handle extraction and quality control. Profits would be split evenly, with Owen retaining full ownership of the cave and mineral rights. The arrangement required Owen to develop skills he had never anticipated needing. He learned to grade crystals by clarity, color, and formation, skills that Hartman taught him during that first visit and that Owen refined through months of practice. He learned to pack specimens for shipping, cushioning them in sawdust and straw so they would arrive undamaged after hundreds of miles of railroad travel. He learned to keep records, tracking inventory and sales with the precision of a banker. He also learned to extract crystals more efficiently without sacrificing quality. The crude tools of his first discovery gave way to specialized equipment that Hartman shipped from St. Louis: thin chisels, dental picks, soft brushes for cleaning specimens without scratching their surfaces. Owen spent hours practicing on lesser formations before approaching the prize specimens, unwilling to damage valuable crystals through impatience or inexperience. The work was demanding, but satisfying in a way that nothing else in his life had been. Each crystal he extracted was a small triumph, a piece of beauty rescued from darkness and brought into the light. Each shipment that departed for St. Louis represented not just income, but accomplishment, proof that he was building something real from what others had dismissed as worthless. He hired help as the operation grew. 2 local men who needed work and were willing to learn the careful techniques that crystal extraction required. Owen trained them personally, sharing knowledge that he had earned through trial and error, building a team that could handle the physical labor while he focused on quality control and business management. By September, Owen had earned more money than his father had left to any single brother. By December, he had earned more than the combined inheritance of William, George, Robert, and Samuel. And the crystals kept coming. The town's attitude toward Owen shifted with the speed of people who suddenly realize they have been mocking someone more successful than themselves. The same merchants who had called him caveman now addressed him as Mr. Thornton and offered credit he no longer needed. The same townspeople who had whispered about his poverty now spoke admiringly of his entrepreneurial spirit and determination. Shop owners who had once hurried him through transactions now lingered to chat, hoping to cultivate a relationship with the man whose wealth was becoming legendary. The transformation was almost comical in its transparency. People who had crossed the street to avoid him now crossed the street to greet him. Invitations to social events arrived weekly: dinners, dances, church socials that had never included him before. Young women who had looked through him as if he didn't exist now smiled and lingered when he came to town. Owen observed it all with a detachment that puzzled some and impressed others. He didn't gloat over his success or punish those who had mocked him. He simply conducted his business, treated everyone with courtesy regardless of their previous behavior, and refused to pretend that the past hadn't happened. "You could make them squirm," Margaret observed once. "Make them apologize. Make them acknowledge how they treated you." What would be the point? Their opinions didn't matter when I was poor. Why should they matter now that I'm rich? I'd rather spend my energy on things that actually improve my life. It was this equanimity that impressed Margaret most. Not the wealth, not the cave, not even the beautiful crystals that sparkled in every room of his underground home. It was the steadiness of his character, unchanged by fortune or misfortune, anchored in something deeper than circumstances. Owen accepted the change with the same equanimity he had shown toward the mockery. People were predictable. They respected success and despised failure, regardless of the character of the person experiencing either. He had not changed. Only his circumstances had changed. The difference in treatment revealed nothing about him and everything about them. His brothers were slower to come around, their pride making it difficult to acknowledge that the youngest Thornton had surpassed them all. William was the first to visit the cave, arriving one autumn afternoon with a bottle of whiskey and an expression that mixed curiosity with something that might have been envy. "I heard you've been doing well," William said, looking around the cave that Owen had transformed into a comfortable home. "The crystal business. Well enough. Father never mentioned anything about crystals, never said the cave was worth anything. Father never explored it properly. Neither did anyone else. They saw a hole in the ground and assumed that was all it was." William was silent for a moment, processing the implicit criticism. "I suppose we owe you an apology. The way we laughed at the will reading—" "You don't owe me anything," Owen said. "You acted according to your nature. So did I. The difference is that my nature led me to look deeper, while yours led you to assume you already knew everything worth knowing." It was the closest Owen ever came to expressing bitterness about his treatment. William left shortly afterward, the whiskey bottle unopened. The other brothers visited over the following months, each with their own version of reconciliation. George offered to stock Owen's supplies at the general store for a discount. Robert offered lumber from the sawmill at cost. Samuel offered beef from his cattle operation. Owen declined all offers politely but firmly. He had built his success without their help, and he would continue without their help. The cave had given him more than wealth. It had given him independence, and he would not trade that for family relationships that had never truly existed. Margaret Chen became a regular visitor to the cave as Owen's circumstances improved. She came initially out of professional interest. The library had received donations for a natural history collection, and Owen's cave offered specimens that no other source could provide. But the visits continued after the library's needs were met, the professional interest giving way to something more personal. They would spend hours in the cave together, Owen showing her new discoveries while Margaret asked questions that revealed her own sharp intelligence. She understood geology better than most. Her father had worked in railroad construction and had taught her to read rock formations during her childhood. She saw things in the cave that Owen had missed, pointed out patterns that suggested where additional deposits might be found. "There," she said one afternoon, pointing to a section of wall that Owen had dismissed as ordinary limestone. "See how the color changes? That discoloration often indicates mineral intrusion. Have you examined it closely?" Owen hadn't. He did that evening after Margaret left and found a pocket of smoky quartz crystals that would eventually sell for $300. Their collaboration became a partnership, then a courtship, then something that both of them knew was heading toward marriage. Margaret's parents worried, not about Owen's character or prospects, but about their daughter choosing to live in a cave, however profitable it might be. "It's not a cave anymore," Margaret told them. "It's a home. You should see what he's done with it." What Owen had done was remarkable. The crude survival shelter of his first months had been replaced by genuine living quarters, a bedroom with a proper bed and dresser, a parlor with comfortable chairs and a writing desk, a kitchen with a real stove and running water piped from the underground stream. He had paneled the walls with wood to provide insulation and aesthetics, had installed glass-paned windows in strategic locations to let in natural light, had carpeted the floors to soften the stone beneath. "You've built something remarkable here," she said during one visit, sitting in the comfortable parlor that Owen had constructed in the main chamber. The space was unrecognizable from the bare cave he had first entered. Carpeted floors, proper furniture, bookshelves lining the walls, and everywhere the soft glow of crystal formations that Owen had left in place as natural decoration. "I found something remarkable," Owen corrected. "The building came after." "No. Finding is easy. Anyone could have found this if they had bothered to look. You looked. You worked. You turned a joke into a fortune. That's not luck. That's character." They married in the spring of 1881, in a ceremony held at the cave entrance with the town's new respect for Owen reflected in the guest list. His brothers attended, uncomfortable but present. Margaret's parents attended, proud but worried about their daughter living in a cave, however luxuriously appointed. The wedding gift Owen gave his bride was a crystal cluster of exceptional quality, deep purple amethyst with flecks of gold that caught the light like captured sunlight. He had found it in the deepest part of the cave, in a chamber he had discovered just weeks before, and had known immediately that it belonged to her. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "So are you. The cave gave me wealth, but you gave me something to spend it on." The Thornton Crystal Cave, as it came to be known, operated for 43 years under Owen's management. The deposits proved even more extensive than Hartman's initial assessment had suggested. Multiple chambers yielded high-quality specimens, and careful extraction ensured that the supply remained steady without exhausting the resource. Owen developed techniques for removing crystals without damaging them. methods that were later adopted by mining operations across the country. He became something of an authority on crystal formation, corresponding with geologists at universities and contributing articles to scientific journals. The knowledge he gained through practical experience complemented the academic understanding of professionals who had studied rocks in classrooms rather than caves. More than one young geologist made the pilgrimage to Arkansas to learn from the self-taught expert who had built a fortune from a useless inheritance. The cave itself became a destination for collectors and scientists from around the world. Owen gave tours to serious visitors, showing them chambers that sparkled with formations no one had seen before he opened them to the light. He turned down offers to sell the property that would have made him wealthy 10 times over, preferring to maintain control of the resource that had given him independence. The fortune he accumulated allowed him to diversify into other businesses, real estate, banking, railroad investments. But the cave remained his primary passion. He spent hours each week underground, exploring new passages, discovering new formations, adding to the collection that had made him wealthy. Margaret bore him 3 children, all of whom grew up playing in the cave's safe passages and learning to appreciate the beauty of crystals from an early age. The eldest son eventually took over the mining operation. The daughter became a geologist who studied crystal formation. The youngest son became a teacher who brought students to the cave to learn about natural history. Owen's brothers all predeceased him, their lives following predictable arcs of moderate success and moderate failure. William lost half the farmland to bad investments. George's store was outcompeted by larger operations. Robert's sawmill burned down and was never rebuilt. Samuel's cattle operation struggled through drought and disease. None of them ever achieved the wealth or independence that Owen had found in his useless cave. Owen Thornton died in 1923 at the age of 71 in the bedroom he had built in the main chamber of the cave that had changed his life. His final words, according to Margaret, who held his hand at the end, were, "Tell them to keep looking deeper. There's always more to find." The cave is still there today, protected as a natural landmark and open to visitors who want to see the crystal formations that made one man's fortune. The main chamber has been preserved much as Owen left it, with the original furniture and the crystal clusters he chose to leave in place rather than sell. A plaque near the entrance tells the abbreviated version of his story: the mocked inheritance, the discovery, the fortune. But the full story is more than any plaque can contain. It's the story of a man who refused to accept others' definitions of value, who looked deeper when everyone else looked away, who built a life from what others considered worthless. Modern geologists have studied the cave extensively, confirming that Owen stumbled upon one of the richest crystal deposits ever discovered in North America. The formations date back millions of years, created by mineral-rich water seeping through limestone and depositing crystals in cavities that slowly expanded over geological time. The specific conditions that created such high-quality specimens, the right temperature, the right pressure, the right chemical composition, were extraordinarily rare. Owen couldn't have known any of this when he first swung his pickaxe at the cave wall. He didn't have the scientific knowledge to understand what he was seeing, or the experience to evaluate its significance. What he had was curiosity, persistence, and a willingness to look deeper than the surface suggested. Those qualities, more than luck or circumstance, were the true source of his fortune. The crystals were always there, waiting to be discovered. It took a particular kind of person to find them, someone who had been given nothing, expected nothing, and therefore had nothing to lose by looking where others hadn't bothered to look. They mocked him for inheriting a useless cave. The cave made him the richest man any of them had ever known. And somewhere in the depths that Owen never finished exploring, more crystals wait to be discovered by whoever is willing to look deeper than the surface.